AA working. All right, we are on page 171, the doctor's nightmare. As we have always discussed in this meeting, it's not the first 164 pages, the first 181, as we include the stories of both the co-founders. As we go through the doctor's nightmare, I was thinking about it today, and you know, because in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, we come from all different backgrounds, walks of life, upbringings, and there's some real differences between Dr. Bob's early years and growing up and Bill's and the training that they received. But they both had alcoholism. And it's really a kind of a snapshot of what we look like. We come into meetings, you know, we got people who come in here that had a silver spoon in their mouth. We come here with people who come from a place where there was no spoon, right? And we all end up in the same place with the same problem, right? Alcoholism. So tonight, as we go through this, we'll see some differences between the way Dr. Bob and Bill were raised, but we will see the same, literally, effects produced by alcohol in their lives. And we'll get more into that as we get into the story. So let's get into the doctor's nightmare. I was born in a small New England village of about 7,000 souls. One of the things that the co-founders did have in common, they're both from the state of Vermont. Dr. Bob and Bill are both from the state of Vermont. The general moral standard was, as I recall it, far above the average. No beer or liquor was sold in the neighborhood, except at the state liquor agency, where perhaps one might procure a pint if he could convince the agent that he really needed it. So Dr. Bob was raised in a community where there was a culture of not drinking, right? So let's continue. Without this proof, the expectant purchaser would be forced to depart empty-handed with none of what I later came to believe was the great panacea for all human ills. And what great panacea for all human ill means is the answer to all problems. The answer to all. Dr. Bob came to believe that alcohol was the answer to all problems. How many people listening to me right now got to that place where you believe alcohol was an answer? And many of us continued to believe it long after it had started to destroy our lives, right? Let's continue. Men who had liquor shipped in from Boston or New York by express were looked upon with great distrust and disfavor by most of the good townspeople. The town was well supplied with churches and schools in which I pursued my early educational activities. So, you know, he gives us a snapshot of where he grew up and what his early life was like. Schools, churches, and a real disdain, if you will, for alcohol. Okay, let's go on. How many of us were raised in those type of environments where there wasn't a lot of drinking present, right? And we were in school, in church, right? And pretty much it wasn't a big part of our early lives. There are some, and then there are others where it was present always, right? So again, we can see, you know, the differences that we have coming in here. My father was a professional man of recognized ability, and both my father and mother were most active in church affairs. Both father and mother were considerably above the average in intelligence. No, so you see how Dr. Bob's upbringing is as opposed to Bill's. Bill's was raised by his grandparents, as his father had left the family, they say as a direct result of his drinking, and Bill's grandfather was an agnostic, right? So much different outlook when it comes to God or spiritual things. Let's continue. Unfortunately for me, I was the only child, and I got a star beside this. It says, which perhaps engendered the selfishness which played such an important part in bringing on my alcoholism. So he kind of alludes to, he's not talking about alcohol yet, but he's talking about alcoholism. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problem. So selfishness and self-centeredness, he immediately identifies with, even though he has yet to take a drink of alcohol. So as an only child, very selfish, very self-centered, and very self-concerned. And we'll see how that plays out later in his story. From childhood through high school, I was more or less forced to go to church, Sunday school, and evening service, Monday night Christian endeavor, and sometime to Wednesday evening prayer meeting. So definitely given a strong spiritual foundation. Keep that in mind, because I know there's a lot of people listening to me right now whose experience mirrors Dr. Bob, who were raised in that kind of environment. I was raised in that kind of environment, going to church until I was old enough to make my own decisions in my house was not an option, and it wasn't something that was up for discussion or debate. You are going, that's it, that's all, right? And so we'll see what happens with Dr. Bob and his attitude toward that. This had the effect of making me resolve that when I was free from parental domination, I would never again darken the doors of a church. I was 14 years old, and I used to fight with my mother every Sunday. Every Sunday we would go through this ritual. Get up. I don't want to get up. Well, you're going to get up because you're going to church. I don't want to go to church. I didn't ask you if you wanted to go to church. I said, get up, you going. So we would go through this thing right every week. So one Sunday I woke up and I'm laying there and I'm waiting on the call because I know it's coming, right? And I thought to myself, Ken, you only got a couple more years of high school. After that, you won't have to do this anymore. There's an end to this. So when she came in there and she said, get up, I said, all right, I'm getting up. And she goes, really? No arguing? I said, no. And she said, well, what changed your mind? And I'm sure she was waiting for me to say, like, I really want to go, or I've had some kind of, this is what I told her. I said, listen, the way I figure it, I got 2 years, 11 months, and 17 more days of this. After that, I won't be here anymore. And I guarantee you, I will not be going. So since it's just a short time left, it's no big deal. And I can remember the look on her face, because I had already decided I'm going to do things my way. Now, obviously, my mother understood much better than I did what that meant, right? Like today, if your kids say that to you, you know where that's going, don't you, right? But at that time, I'm 14 years old, I'm about to turn 15, I already know everything. And so this ain't no big deal to me, right? I think she would have much rather I had argued with her than said that, right? Look back at your own history. God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Looking in the rearview mirror that day, and I could tell you that this was a particular moment. I made that decision, even though I didn't say it that way. I made that decision that day. Perhaps you could look back at it and see a moment when you did. Maybe it just gradually happened to you. Maybe it was something you were never exposed to. But here's the cool part about understanding that. Because I made that decision then, in the third step, I can make the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God just as easily as I made that. What I want you to understand is that it is a decision. It's not a lightning bolt strike that some people get and some people don't. Everybody right now around the country that is listening to me, if you are within the sound of my voice, that is a decision that any one of us can make. And sometimes when I come here and I'm new, I don't understand that. And I'm confused about it. Bill Wilson talked about being spiritually bewildered in the 12 and 12 when we come here and when we're new. So I want to just emphasize and reemphasize, it is a choice, and it is a choice we can make. And we will talk about this much more when we get back to the beginning and we start moving toward the third step. Okay, let's go on. This resolution I kept steadfastly for the next 40 years. So Dr. Bob, once he got free of parental, what did he say, domination, he ain't go back to church for 40 years. 40 years. And I must say, I pretty much matched his record, just about. Okay. Except, of course, there's always an exception. When circumstances made it seem unwise to absent myself. And this is something that I struggled with when I came into the program, because I felt like I had played around with God. My understanding of God was not what it is now. I had, over the years, developed a lot of what we would call now prejudices, old ideas about God that weren't true. And one of them was that if you've done the things I've done, God is not going to forgive you. I believed I had played around with God because I would go back to church when I thought it would benefit me. My family was church-going folk. So if you wanted to get on their right side, if you wanted to get, usually I needed money, usually for an attorney or some other trouble or fines or something that I've got into. Step one is go to church, right? And then after church, go hang out with them, right? And so when I could, and I'm not sincerely trying to go to church at this point to get no help. Later I did. But at this point, I'm not doing that. I'm doing it because I believe there's something in it for me. Is anybody following me? I'm doing it because I believe there's something in it for me. And so when I came into the program, I had a lot of guilt and shame behind that. And I also had a feeling that I was unworthy of God's help because of the attitude I had and the things I had done and the way that I felt that I had played around with God in the church. Okay, let's continue. After high school came 4 years in one of the best colleges in the country, where drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity, and that was Dartmouth. And that holds a special significance for me because when I graduated high school, I applied to 4 universities in this country. That was Miami of Ohio, the University of Michigan, Northwestern University, and Dartmouth. And I got letters of acceptance from all four, right? Now, I had not read Doctor's Nightmare at this time, and I did not know that it was a place where drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity. I think that would have made me push a little harder to go to Dartmouth. My father's response to Dartmouth was, wow. When he saw what it cost, he said, that's a lot of money for somebody who does the stuff you do, right? My mother looked at it and said, Ivy League, very impressive, not on your life are we spending this kind of money, because alcoholism was already very, very present in our family, right? And it's already affecting stuff. I wanted to go to Dartmouth really because it was Ivy League, and how I feel about myself is based on what I think you think of me. I want everybody to look at me and say, wow, Kemp went to the Ivy League, right? I ain't care nothing about Dartmouth. Nothing. I really didn't know that much about it. You know, I knew that they had sent me some letters. I had applied. They had accepted me. Wow. And that pretty much was it, right? So Dr. Bob was a Dartmouth man. Let us continue. I went to Miami of Ohio, which they called the Yale of the West. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to go there. And I found out when I got there that drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity there as well. So I don't know. I think pretty much anywhere I would have been, I would have found that element, right? And let's see what happened to the good doctor. Almost everyone seemed to do it. I got this highlighted. I did it more and more and had lots of fun without much grief, either physical or financial. So this is the beginning of Dr. Bob's drinking. So what do we got? Having fun, not many consequences, okay? And that's because alcoholism is progressive. And we're going to see its progression not only in his life, but on his life and the effect on the lives of the people around him. But in the beginning, I can identify completely. Think about the early days. Whether you went to college or not is immaterial. Think about the early days. Good times, living for the weekend, right? Not a whole lot of consequences, right? Feeling sociable, dancing, hanging out with your buddies, feeling that unity, right, with the party community. I think we all, right, no matter what our station in those early days, that's what was so attractive about it, right? That was what was so attractive about it. So it was like that for me in the beginning, right? Let's go on. I seemed to be able to snap back the next morning better than most of my fellow drinkers who were cursed or perhaps blessed with a great deal of morning after nausea. And I don't know about anybody else in here, but I was not a throwing up drunk. I was a guy that could wake up the next day. Eventually, I would have to have a shot to kind of steady me. And that started when I think I was a sophomore in college when I started the morning drinking. But I didn't have a lot of heavy consequences at that time, I thought. That's the funny thing about alcoholism is you can't see what it's doing to you till you're free of it. If you were to get a copy of my college transcripts, and I got them later when I decided to go back to school, I wanted to get an advanced degree. And I had never, when you're living in the picture, you can't see the picture. I had an excuse or a justification for everything that was happening in my life that was negative. Like, my grades are going down. I said, well, there's a simple explanation for that. I'm taking too many classes that have math in them, right? I'm taking calculus and I'm taking physics. I mean, it's just there's too much of it. Or well, this professor doesn't like me. I don't understand why, but I've got some personality issues. I could rationalize and justify. And if you looked at my grades from the first semester that I got there till the time I left, they went just like this. And it was the clearest picture of the progression of alcoholism in my life that I've ever seen. I went to class less. I did less work, right? I drank more. I stayed out more. It went from weekends to now all during the week. I was in the bars every night, right? I could look at that, and it was the clearest picture that I've ever seen. But if you asked me in those days, how's it going? I would have told you it's going great. I'm having a good time. If you said to me, like my mother then would ask me, your grades seem to just continue to be getting worse. And I would say, well, the further you get into this thing, the harder it gets. And, and then I just got a million excuses. And none of them, and I mean none of them, have anything to do with alcohol. Now, I was starting to have some other consequences as a result of my behavior, right? Because alcoholism is progressive. So we'll see what happens with the doctor here. Never once in my life have I had a headache, which fact leads me to believe that I was an alcoholic almost from the start. I got this highlighted. My whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else. A state of mind which became more and more predominant as the years passed. If there is a better definition of selfishness and self-centeredness, I've never seen it. If that line right there describes me as a person prior to coming here more than anything else I've ever read in this book. I walked around this earth as if I was the only person on it, and the only function that any other human being had in my life was to do whatever they could for me. That's it. That's all. I did not think about how other people felt. I did not think about how my actions affected the lives of others. I am completely oblivious to other human beings. And I'll tell you, I can still be like that today without these steps. I believe I was like that even prior to the beginning of drinking. It was always about me, always. So Dr. Bob just really, wow, like when you look at the steps and what the steps are designed to do, right? The steps are to take me from selfish and self-centered to unselfish and other-centered, okay? Selfish, self-centered to unselfish and other-centered. God first, then you, then me. So it's an amazing thing. So what he just described was the foundation, literally, of what this book talks about in the early chapters. Okay, let's continue because we're going to see a lot more of this. I was graduated summa cum laude in the eyes of the drink. Right? By the skin of my teeth. I mean the skin of my teeth. I had an academic advisor, Dr. Thornton. And I kind of avoided Dr. Thornton a lot because he asked a lot of questions that I did not want to answer. But I remember coming to see Dr. Thornton. Now, mind you, this is my 5th year. It took me a little longer. I was busy. And I went to see him, and he said to me, I looked at your paperwork this morning and I see that you're going to graduate. And I have to say, Mr. Coleman, I'm amazed. I never believed you would make it. Okay. This is a man who a couple years earlier had said to me, Mr. Coleman, if it were within our power, we'd execute you. So it's 2 years later, and I'm getting out of there, right? And it's to look back at the opportunities that I wasted as a result of my alcoholism is a staggering thing. I had opportunities to do a lot of things, be a part of a lot of things, and nope. But at the time, I didn't see it. Look back over your own life. Ask yourself, what did I really want to do? What did I really want? I was a young person. What did you really want to do with your life? What did you really want to be? What happened? How did this thing is a taker. It is not a giver. Alcoholism, I talk a lot about how it reduces us. It reduces our goals, our hopes, our dreams, our ambition. It reduces us mentally, physically, spiritually. It directly affects the lives of the people around us, and they become a part of this reduction of life. We adversely affect our families financially, spiritually. The list just goes on until I look at this thing for what it really is. And trust me, I was running around the streets of Sandusky, Ohio, 30 years old, and you could have put a gun to my head, and you could have not gotten me to admit that alcohol was a problem in my life, nor could you have gotten me to admit that you weren't a problem in my life. I mean, that's how I lived. I could not see it. I could not see it. Let's go on. The next 3 years I spent in Boston, Chicago, and Montreal in the employ of a large manufacturing concern, selling railway supplies, gas engines of all sorts, and many other items of heavy hardware. So he gets a job as a salesman. During these years, I drank as much as my purse permitted, still without paying too great a penalty, although I was beginning, I got this highlighted, to have morning jitters at times. So what do we see? Because we talk about the progression of alcoholism. This is the first sign of what? Physical problems. How many people listening to me right now as a result of this disease have had health issues? How many of us, right? This is the beginning, right? Some jitters. I'm 19 years old. I was a sophomore in school, and I got up one day, and I went to button my shirt, and my hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't button it. So I'm thinking all kinds of things. I'm thinking Parkinson's, God, I don't know what, right? So I went down to the tavern where I usually get most of my advice. And I said to my friend, Tom, the bartender, I believe I have Parkinson's. Tom, the bartender, looked at me and said, you're 19 years old. You ain't got Parkinson's. He says, I'll tell you what. He says, when you get up tomorrow, if your hands are shaking, I want you to drink 2 shots of 100 proof Old Grandad. He says, I guarantee you your hands will stop shaking. So I went down to College Corner. I got a fifth of 100 proof Old Grandad. I got me a I didn't have any shot glasses. I stole some beakers from a science lab. I had 50 milliliter beakers. So if you came in, I would say to you, what do you want, a 20, 30, 40, or 50, right? I could pour you drinks accordingly. I had a measuring cup, right? Because I'm cheap, right? And if you don't want a 50, I can give you a 20. Anyway, I get up the next morning, my hands are shaking again. So I poured 2 shots, 2 50s, I drank them, and guess what? My hands stopped shaking. I'm 19 years old. And here's the thought that I had. That man is a genius. That man's a genius. Now, it was pointed out to me later. Bill said to me, yeah, he said, I had that same experience. He said, do you notice, Ken, that you never, ever questioned the bartender? But at that time in your life, you had counselors, advisors, coaches, family, people who loved and cared about you, who were trying to help you, and all you ever said to them was, leave me alone, I'm grown, I ain't hurting nobody. That was my battle cry. I ain't hurting nobody, leave me alone, I'm grown. He says, but you never, ever questioned the bartender. Why is it that I'm always willing to listen to the people who harm me? Why is that? Stop and think about your own life. Why is it I'm always willing to listen to the people who harm me? The beginning of the physical progression that's going to go on with Dr. Bob. Let's go on. I lost only a half a day's work during these 3 years. So he's still going to work. He's got a little physical thing going on, not a big deal. And he's still doing okay. My next move was to take up the study of medicine, entering one of the largest universities in the country. To our friends listening tonight in Ann Arbor, he went to the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan. There, I took up the business of drinking with much greater earnestness than I had previously shown. What's happened? Progression, right? I drink more, right, to try to get the same effect, right? It takes more to produce the same effect. So I'm drinking more. My body is craving more. Alcoholism is a progressive disease. Okay? Let's continue. On account of my enormous capacity for beer, I was elected to membership in one of the drinking societies. Oh, I bet your mom and dad was proud, right? Yeah. As a result of his ability to drink large quantities of beer, right? He's elected to membership in one of the drinking societies and soon became one of the leading spirits. I'll bet he was. Yeah. I will bet he was. Many mornings I have gone to classes and even though fully prepared, returned and walked back to the fraternity house because of my jitters. Can we circle this? Because we see the progression continuing. The physical progression is getting worse. The jitters have now reached a point where they are affecting his ability, right, to carry out his priorities. Let's continue. Not daring to enter the classroom for fear. Could we circle the word fear, please? For fear of making a scene should I be called on for recitation. So he begins to skip class because he is afraid that if he's called on because of his worsening physical condition, that he's going to make a scene. I experienced that very same thing. And a lot of times I didn't turn around. I just never left my dorm or my apartment, right? A lot of fear. I haven't done the stuff I need to be doing. If I get called on, a lot of times I went to class, I was high. And that's a deal where I would always slide down in my seat, right? Trying not to be obvious because I don't want to be called on. And those are the times when you definitely are going to get called on, right? And after a few negative experiences with that, right? So I just start skipping and I start missing more. You see how this thing is progressive. Alcoholism begins to bleed into all areas of our lives, physically, right? Emotionally, mentally, right? Our family, our priorities, our education. Stop and take a look back. I asked you earlier, what did you want to do with yourself? What happened? What happened? Okay. Let's go on. This went from bad to worse until sophomore spring, when, after a prolonged period of drinking, now he's going on long, protracted drunks. Long, protracted drunks. I made up my mind that I could not complete my course, so I packed my grip and went south to spend a month on a large farm owned by a friend of mine. Same thing Bill Wilson did. Didn't Bill Wilson say, I finally figured out that the law is not for me, right? Do you see how this thing takes? It did the same thing to Bill Wilson. After a while, it's like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. So I got to get out of here. And he did the same. Now, Bill went to Wall Street and tried to do what he wanted to do without his education. Dr. Bob packs his grip and goes to a large farm owned by a friend of his. When I got the fog out of my brain, I decided that quitting school was very foolish and that I had better return and continue my work. So he walked away from school and then decides he needs to go back. When I reached school, I discovered the faculty had other ideas on the subject. They don't look too kindly on you packing up and leaving, and then after a while coming back and saying, well, I'm back. Not exactly how colleges work, right? After much argument, they allowed me to return and take my exams, all of which I passed creditably. But they were much disgusted and told me they would attempt to struggle along without my presence. So what happened? They let him take his finals, he passed them, and they said, now you got to go. We done had enough of your act. You got to go. After many painful discussions, they finally gave me my credits, and I migrated to another of the leading universities of the country and entered as a junior that fall. And this was Rush Medical College in Chicago. Rush Medical College in Chicago. So he goes there and he's a junior. Okay? There, my drinking became so much worse, progression continues, that the boys in the fraternity house where I live felt forced to send for my father, who made a long journey in the vain endeavor to get me straightened around. All right. I said many times, until Bill's story becomes Kent's story, it's just recreational reading until Dr. Bob's nightmare becomes Kent's nightmare. It's just recreational reading. So I challenge you as we go through this to look at this from the inside. Did I drink like they drank? Did I feel like they felt? Did I do what they did? Right? What's the answer? We see the selfishness, we see the self-centeredness, we see the lack of regard for others. We see the progression of alcoholism and how it's affecting not only his life, but now they send for his father in Vermont to come to Chicago to get him straightened out. Now, how many of you have had someone who loves and cares about you in the throes of this thing try to help you? How many? Let's continue. This had little effect, however, for I kept on drinking and used a great deal more hard liquor than in former years. So it's progressing. And now the family is directly involved. God only knows what his father saw when he came to Chicago. I came home one summer and my parents left and went on vacation, and it was in the summertime, and I was home from school. When they came back, there was probably, I wouldn't even dare to count, 15 of those big green garbage bags full of bottles. I mean, full of bottles. And I can remember my father, because they was out behind the garage. This was in the old days when they had the barrels, and I threw them in the barrels, and he took the trash out. And he came back, and he said to me, "What on earth has been going on here?" Now, they know that I was drinking. There'd already been trouble in our family. Don't get me wrong. It ain't like this, no, but I don't know that he realized the extent of it. Because for a long time, they was like, well, he's in a phase, right? And eventually, he gonna come out of it and straighten up. When they actually see it, something like that, right? What's the effect that has? I used to also partake in a lot of alcohol's cousins. And at one time, I was the proud owner of 67 bongs. So I can tell you how many of them there was 67. And I named every one of them. Every one of them had a name. They was my kid. When I come home from school, because I'm not a guy that thinks far ahead, right? I come home from school, I got 67 bongs in the trunk of my car. I mean, they're like my kids, right? So I hid them, I thought, right, in the back of my closet at home, right? So I go out on an all-nighter and come home on Saturday morning, and all 67 of my kids was on the dining room table, right? And I will not get into the discussion that took place that day. Then there was the time when they opened up the trunk of my car. My father was getting a jack or something, and there was many, many pounds of a leafy substance, because that was my side job. I ran around Ohio on the weekends doing that. And all of that ended up in the house. My mother said that day, she said, I don't know who all this belongs to, but if I didn't think they'd kill you, I'd flush all of it down the toilet. I tell you this because I want you to look at your own life, and I want you to look at the people in your life and the stuff they've seen. I got a tendency to just, Dr. Bob said, I'll blow through life like there's no one around me. And then I come in here and I wake up. So anybody who's sitting there right now with that I ain't hurt nobody mentality, and I want you to stop and think, take a look at this. Is this not my story? Alcoholism engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. I said it before. Alcoholism doesn't tap them on the shoulder. It engulfs them. It changes their finances. It changes their future. I think of all the people that I worked with over the years who retired, who worked in automotive. How many of them right now are still working someplace, even though they're retired, because they're taking care of their grandchildren because this disease has touched their children? Do we even think about? No. Because when I'm in the picture, I can't see the picture. What we really talk about here is step one stuff. Really, you're talking about powerlessness and unmanageability. But we're going to get into much, much more. Let's go on. Coming up to final exams, I went on a particularly strenuous spree. Remember when the book said we have a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, right? I would get loaded before exams to try to quell the fear, right? Only I have a tendency to overshoot the mark a little bit. Let's go on. When I went in to write the examination, my hand trembled so I could not hold a pencil. I passed in at least 3 absolutely blank books. Do you see? This man is in medical school. He is a junior. And he's going to exams and is unable to even write. He's turning in blank. They used to have the blue books when I was in there. And you're looking at a man that has turned in a couple of blank blue books. I took Greek one time. And when I got to the final, it was Greek to me. And I thought I was prepared, right? I spent a full 15 minutes cramming for that thing, right? Oh, I know what it's like to turn in a blank blue book. You sit there and you wait till at least 5 people turn theirs in. You can't be the first one, right? So then, you know, I would wait for somebody. I was in a big lecture hall, about 300 people, and I'd wait till somebody go, and I just got up and went right behind them, you know, and I threw mine up. Dude, I did not go to school to do that. But I had alcoholism, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, much less that there was anything that could be done about it. Let's just go on here. I was, of course, soon on the carpet, and the upshot was that I had to go back for 2 more quarters and remain absolutely dry if I wish to graduate. Wow. Wow. Okay. You're going to have to do 2 quarters, no drinking, in order to graduate. Okay. Let's see what happens. This I did and proved myself satisfactory to the faculty, both in deportment and scholastically. So he was able to moderate briefly, right? Given sufficient reason, sometimes we could stop for a little while. Sometimes we can. Sometimes we can't. But sometimes we can. He's about to become a doctor. There was a lot on the table here, right? And he shut it down just long enough to get out of there. There were times, and that's how I got out of school, when I had to, I was in enough hot water, I would have to shut it down for a while. And at that point, when I was 20, 21 years old, I could shut it down for a minute, right? And I could do enough. I wasn't excelling. I did enough to get by. I did enough to get by. Let's go on. I conducted myself so creditably that I was able to secure a much coveted internship in a Western city. That Western city is Akron, Ohio. So the good doctor makes it to Akron, where I spent 2 years. During these 2 years, I was kept so busy that I hardly left the hospital at all. Consequently, I could not get into any trouble. So what did he do? He buried himself in his work, right? He buried himself in his work. So he stayed out of trouble. He's an intern and he's finishing his internship. Okay? When those 2 years were up, I opened an office downtown. Many of you who are listening to me who live in this region, who have been to Akron, know where that office is.
It's hard to get.
It's on Main Street. Used to be Key Bank. I don't know what's in there now. But it's the corner office on the 2nd floor. And I ride past it many, many times every year. And every year I sit at that red light, I look up at that corner office, and it makes me think about a lot of things. And there's a lot of things that we'll talk about concerning that office later. But Dr. Bob set up shop in downtown Akron, down on Main Street. I had some money, all the time in the world, and considerable stomach trouble. I soon discovered that a couple of drinks would alleviate my gastric distress. Well, that alcohol sure is a cure, eh? It's a cure-all, no matter what you got going, right? At least for a few hours at a time. So it was not at all difficult for me to return to my former excessive indulgence. So what happened? Okay. Does it say that he drank moderately for a number of years? Nope. Right? What happened to him? Did he pick up where he left off?
Progression.
Nope. He quickly got to the place where he would have been had he never stopped. Alcoholism is progressive even when you do not drink. So when he picked back up, he didn't go back. You don't go back in time. Your body doesn't regenerate and go back in time. So what happens when you pick back up? You go right to where you would have been had you never stopped. There's a story about a little tiger. Some of y'all know the tiger story. Well, and I'm going to tell it really, really quick because a lot of you haven't heard the Tiger story. But when I was working at Stella Maris, this is something that I made up to tell the guys to help us understand the progressive nature of this thing. When you're born, it's a little tiger in you. He's sleeping. He don't bother nobody. He just lays in you. He just sleeps until the day comes that you pick up a drink or a drug. Because the only food that the tiger will accept is alcohol and drugs. So when you start drinking, he wakes up and he starts to feed on what you give him. And the more you drink, the bigger he gets. The bigger he gets, the more it takes to satisfy him. Is everybody following me, right? So you feed the tiger gets bigger, it takes more to satisfy the tiger. Eventually, the tiger gets to the point where he has to be fed continually, right? And you end up in the rooms of recovery. When you end up in the rooms of recovery, you get sober and you stop feeding the tiger. So the tiger goes back to sleep. But there's a funny thing about this tiger. Once he's been awake, he'll go back to sleep. But every day, he continues to grow. And if I pick up a drink and drink it, he will wake back up. But it will not be the same tiger that went to sleep May 18th of 1992. He will be 26 years and 10 months, whatever it is, bigger than he was when he went to sleep. And he is going to be awfully angry because he ain't been fed in a long time. Is anybody following me? Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Alcoholism will progress even when you're not drinking. You do not pick up where you left off. You will pick up where you would have been had you never stopped. That is the progressive nature of alcoholism. And if you've ever seen anybody who has not drank in 20-some years pick up a drink and keep drinking, it will get ugly, and it will get ugly in a hurry. Okay? All right. Okay, mark that spot. We'll stop right there.